Our first big Pokemon Pocket tournaments of the Shining Revelry expansion are underway, and as expected, it looks like Giratina EX is going to be the breakout card from our latest card pack. Let's go ahead and dive on into all of the performance metrics and other details surrounding the over 1,500 deck lists played in Pokemon Pocket's three largest tournaments since the expansion dropped. Let's kick things off by looking at the starting metagame distribution of the most popular deck lists among our competitors this first weekend. The most popular archetype was Giratina Darkrai Control, featuring Druddigon as its stalling lead, clocking in at 15.5% of the starting field. Gallade EX backed up by Hitmonlee coming in at 10%. Gyarados EX being powered up ahead of time by Manaphy coming in at 10%. The previous metagames format powerhouse, Dialga Arceus, only at 9.5%. Rampardos Lucario, a popular deck from our previous metagame, coming in at only 5%. Weavile Darkrai clocking in at 3.5%, and a 17 trainer Giratina single Mewtwo EX variation coming in at 2% of our starting deck list. To try and draw some conclusions about the power level of these archetypes, we're going to be taking a look at the almost 200 deck lists that had 70% or higher win rates in these tournaments that I analyzed, and then we'll use a metric I call the performance delta that measures how much each individual archetype grew or shrank between these two groups, letting us determine how strong its performance was overall in these tournaments. Giratina Darkrai control decks accounted for 21% of our top performing archetypes, which was a 35% increase overall from their starting 15.5% metagame share. Gallade EX decks were 13.5% of our top performers. Gyarados EX Manaphy decks were 12.5%. Dialga Arceus decreased its metagame share, being only 7% of our top performers, while starting out as 9.5% of the field for a 26% decrease overall. Rampardos Lucario also saw a reduction in its performance delta, being 4.5% of the top performers, losing 10% overall. Weavile Darkrai overperformed a little bit, up to 4.5%. And the 17 trainer Giratina Mewtwo variations doubled their starting metagame share of 2%, up to 4% of our top performing field. Looking at some of the matchup tables of these top decks into another, I would wager we're going to see this format iterate on itself at least a couple of times before things settle. To start with the Giratina Darkrai matchups, we see it have a relatively even time against Gallade Hitmonlee as well as Dialga Arceus. It performs very strongly against Rampardos Lucario and Weavile Darkrai, but it gets absolutely dumpstered by the Gyarados EX Manaphy deck. I would wager, thanks to that deck having access to things like Red, that let it clean out your Giratinas and Darkrai even if they're wearing a cape. Looking into the Dialga Arceus matchup table, it's easy to see why it underperformed this first weekend. While it's relatively even against Giratina Darkrai control, it underperforms against Gallade, Gyarados Manaphy, and Rampardos Lucario, which are the three other most popular decks from our tournament's representation. As is often the case when it's been popular in the past, Gyarados EX has an incredibly polarized matchup table in our first weekend's data. It's very strong against Giratina Darkrai Control as well as Dialga Arceus, but it comes up incredibly short against fighting variations, especially those leveraging Hitmonlee that can kick a Magikarp before it gets evolved on the bench. That second thing there, Hitmonlee fighting variations, I would wager would be one of the best decks to be exploring moving forward if you're looking to attack this metagame. Being able to kick past a Druddigon or a Manaphy to clear out a Magikarp are likely both very powerful things to be doing into the decks that had good performances in this first weekend. Let's kick off looking at specific deck lists with the 17 trainer Giratina EX Mewtwo that was our strongest performer in this first weekend, albeit in a smaller sample size, being just 2% of our starting field and doubling that up to 4% of our top performers. In my mind, there are a few primary advantages to this low Pokemon count deck over previous water variations we've seen be successful in the past. The first is that you're not dependent on a high variance card like Misty to generate you additional energy, since Giratina's Pokemon ability has that baked in. That same ability also means that this deck list really doesn't mind going first, since it lets you get your Giratina ramping sooner than ever. The other is that all of your Pokemon in this deck hit hard and fast. Mewtwo has a consistent flow of 50 damage starting on your second turn, and once Giratina starts cracking for 130, it gets to do so every single turn until it gets knocked out. This deck list also gets to leverage Dawn as a way to allow you to move Giratina's energy up to Mewtwo to allow you to start cracking for that 150 damage side drive, which you can also kick up to 170 with red that much sooner, catching your opponent off guard before they can ever get their strategy online. Like most of the decks we're going to talk about today in specifics, the detailed supporting cards here vary a lot from successful list to successful list. That's something that will likely take a little bit to get optimized as the metagame settles. To look at our most popular archetype in our first weekend, we have the Giratina Darkrai control deck featuring Druddigon as its stalling lead. The basic strategy here is relatively straightforward. You start with Druddigon in your active spot, and you have all dark energy in your energy zone, letting you get in a chip shot for 20 every turn with Darkrai. You then end your turn in the beginning by space-time bellowing on Giratina, attaching a Psychic to it. Once you've built up 3 Psychic on Giratina, you can get into the active spot either by waiting for your Druddigon to get knocked out or leafing it back to your bench. Giratina then starts cracking for 130 damage every turn, which you add in 20 from a Darkrai chip shot, another 20 from a copy of Red, maybe a Rough Skin trigger or a Rocky Helmet ability, and suddenly your Giratina is clearing things that even have 170 plus HP in a single swing, which is an impressive rate for a basic Pokemon. Dialga Arceus also looking very similar to previous seasons, with Red being an offensive addition and Pokemon Center Lady being a new defensive addition. I think this supporter that heals is a very big gain for this archetype, since it often leads into its beefy basic Pokemon, and having them survive longer is going to be helpful in a number of your matchups. One call out among the Pokemon here, while none of them are new, is that I think Mew EX is a card that lines up very well into Giratina, which is going to be increasingly more popular. Giratina leaves itself at just 130 HP after it does 20 recoil, and when you combine that with Red or Rocky Helmet, you're even cutting down one of the most common monsters in the game right now through a copy of Giant Cape. Moving along to Gallade Hitmonlee, the Pokemon base in these decks is entirely unchanged from our previous format, but they've gained important new additions in the utility slots. Red is a very common one, giving you 20 extra damage to opposing EX Pokemon, and Iono gives you another way to consistently shuffle through cards in your deck, allowing you to assemble your stage 2 finisher a lot more consistently. Our last 3 deck lists, Gyarados Manaphy, Rampardos Lucario, and Weavile Darkrai, don't really have any notable inclusions from our latest expansion. There's a number of players experimenting with new utility cards like Red or even Iono to add consistency to stage 2s like Rampardos, but by and large you can play these things card for card with everything from last season, and they're still looking powerful as the metagame is developing. The thing that stands out to me looking at our first weekend of data in the Shining Revelry tournament metagame is that there isn't really a massive standout performer. While the 17 trainer Giratina Mewtwo deck doubled up its metagame share, it was fairly small to start, meaning that doubling from 2 to 4 really isn't all that impressive. Even the things that underperformed towards the top only underperformed by a small margin, so while Dialga Arceus is down, for example, I wouldn't count it out quite yet while we wait for the metagame to ebb and flow at the top a little bit more. It's also worth noting that while these deck lists are all a little bit more on the tame and less experimental side, that's also to be expected while players are still getting cards and figuring things out. There are a handful of sweet new things that spiked individual results, even if they didn't have high play rates in our first weekend of tournaments. So if you want to see some sweet tournament deck lists that included things like Beedrill, Wug Trio, new Charizard, and even a Tinkaton deck list that spiked a powerful result, make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you don't miss my best new decks roundup coming here real soon. If you enjoyed my data-driven metagame breakdown for the first weekend of the Shining Revelry tournament metagame, make sure you smash the like button on this one. I appreciate everybody that made it all the way through to the end of the video, and I hope your next pack is an excellent one.